Keep a straight face. From Bez to Brian Kavanagh. Is he the outgoing Chief Executive of Horse Racing Ireland, or is he going to go around again? Do you think if enough people write to government saying this guy's got to stay, look what he's done for Irish racing?
Well, very interesting question. And it's a question that's been asked before over the years. Brian Kavanagh has been, I think, to anybody I think would agree who's involved in Irish horse racing, has been an excellent Chief Executive of Horse Racing Ireland. Irish horse racing now, as we saw at Cheltenham, generally speaking, is in rude health, and I think Brian's relations with government have been instrumental towards that. You only saw last year, at a time when there's major national funding issues, horse racing received another huge wedge of cash from the Irish government. However, it's not the first time that whether Brian stays on or not has been in question. In theory, someone who leads a state-affiliated body like this in Ireland is supposed to do one fixed 7-year term, and then somebody else comes in. There have been exceptions to the rule, but that has been the general rule. So after Brian did one 7-year term, there were questions about whether he'd do a second term. He did do a second 7-year term, and those same questions then arose before he did his latest 5-year term, when there were also questions about whether some people arguing that he had lobbied to keep his position, which he strenuously denied, and I think that was then put to one side. He carried on, and again, he's done an excellent job. But it's that question of whether he should now carry on as well. In the Racing Post, Jim Bolger and Willie Mullins both come out with very elegant arguments for why Brian should remain as Chief Executive of Horse Racing Ireland. Against that, there will be those who feel that in that sort of role, a role that is in fact linked to the Irish government, somebody else should come and take it. There will be strong candidates for that. I know John Osborne, who works within HRI's Director of Equine Welfare, is an excellent individual, and if Brian isn't going to be the next or the continued Chief Executive of HRI, I'm sure in John Osborne, they would have a very worthy successor.
But there is no doubt the announcement of his departure, of his intended departure, has come at a time when his share price is at an all-time high. Wellchild, who had £200,000 raised for them, wonderful charity they are too, by their association with the Cheltenham Festival. They were the named partner of the Cheltenham Gold Cup and the festival as a whole, Lee, and out of a potentially difficult situation, as you mentioned in your column this week, Cheltenham made a very good one.
Yeah, so you refer to share prices there. Well, the Cheltenham Festival's share price, Cheltenham Racecourses' share price as brands were not good after last year's Cheltenham Festival. We know what happened there. We know that people were unhappy that the meeting took place, even though I think you speak to anyone within the Jockey Club or the BHA and they will tell you that government wanted that meeting to take place. Regardless of that, Cheltenham Racing, the festival, were heavily criticised. Potentially, I don't know, but you could certainly see a case for saying that Magners chose not to take the third of their 3 years and in a deal to sponsor the Gold Cup and as a wider title partner of the festival, because that brand had been damaged. You could make a case thinking that they decided they just didn't want that association this year. They will still have presumably had to make a financial contribution to honour their commitment to Cheltenham, but it left the racecourse with a situation of who do we have to sponsor the Gold Cup? I think they came up with an excellent solution of partnering with a charity that already had strong connections to horse racing through Chamberlain and Sir Anthony McCoy and Ollie Bell. They've found a way whereby this charity has raised has had almost £200,000 raised for it. Some immensely generous contributions from the Irish racing community at the Cheltenham Festival, from some of the winning owners of the Cheltenham Festival. A huge sum of money has been raised for charity that does amazingly good work with sick children. And so you had a situation where you had nobody to support the Gold Cup and the festival. They found a way of backing a charity, and for me, that is a pretty nigh on perfect outcome, and I would argue it is a more accurate reflection of what Cheltenham Racecourse and the Jockey Club are really like relative to the way they were painted after last year's festival.
National Trainers Federation has issued a call to arms. That was Rupert Arnold this week, urging trainers to campaign their horses more boldly if they want to achieve success at the biggest festivals. This, of course, was off the back of the Cheltenham Festival. It's an interesting construct, this, one that flies in the face of the way that a lot of trainers, both in England and Ireland, have campaigned horses in recent years.
Yeah, so this debate of where do we go from here, British racing after the Cheltenham Festival 23-5 Drubby, lots of people have had lots of things to say, and there will be more said over the coming weeks and months in terms of deeper analysis of what went wrong and what can be done better. The National Trainers Federation, they commented this week with their Chief Executive Rupert Arnold raising various thoughts about perhaps what could be done differently. One of those thoughts was that perhaps trainers could be more aggressive in their campaigning of horses. There have clearly been instances this jump season of horses who haven't raced very often and have come to Cheltenham Festival off the back of a very light campaign, and contrasts with the situation in Ireland where people would say, well, you looked at the Dublin Racing Festival, you look at the Leopardstown Christmas Festival, examples of their best horses being campaigned in hot competition before Cheltenham. But as you say, you look at various trainers within Britain, someone like Paul Nicholls, for example, has certainly embraced the idea of racing horses before Cheltenham, and indeed has taken the view that the Cheltenham Festival isn't everything, and you don't necessarily need to direct a horse towards the festival if there are good races either side of Cheltenham, which there clearly are. But there has been, and there is going to be, an awful lot of soul searching about where we go, about what our position is relative to Ireland. I would just say that Ireland, relative to us, is actually in a very strong position, partly because it gets an enormous amount of help from government as well. You know, their financial position is different to ours, and you can take it back to the matters you were talking about with Charlie Parker earlier on. The structure of British racing doesn't necessarily make it easy to make things better in British racing.
It doesn't. Adrian McCarthy has tested positive for a metabolite of cocaine. He was officially 1,000 times over the accepted limit, but he admitted that he has been an habitual cocaine user, Lee, particularly since the lockdown, and it will not be lost on anyone that the lockdown has had a significant effect on people's mental health and has caused particularly significant addiction issues. So there's probably sort of two areas we need to explore here.
Yeah, and of course that, Nick, would apply to people across all walks of society, and I think it would be impossible not to have sympathy for people who found this last year particularly hard. This case with Adrian McCarthy again can be seen on a number of levels. On the one hand, you have the fact that the BHA's regulator has to punish someone in these circumstances, because you have an individual who is riding horses in a horse race, and when they're that far over the acceptable allowed threshold, they are in effect putting other people in danger. Yeah, and therefore action has to be taken. But you have the wider issue of the sport has to try and find a way of stopping this sort of thing happening.
It struck me when I read this, not long ago we had Philip Prince, jockey Philip Prince, just saying exactly how bad his addiction had become during this period of loneliness and boredom and lack of direction.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
That's two cases where...
It's two cases, and there have been many more cases, sadly, even before this year came along, of jockeys testing positive for cocaine. And we all know cocaine is a big issue across society as a whole, but our racing's job is to look after racing's part of society, and there would appear to be good reason for the sport to think that there is a particular problem here, and that problem has to be tackled. We don't have the answers. There are far cleverer people than we will that may see things that can be done, but something clearly has to be done.
Affordability checks make their weekly appearance on this list of talking points. What was the forward step this week in terms of the gambling review?
So very, very briefly, the story so far is the Gambling Commission had a call to people to give their views on the future of betting, in the sense that should there be affordability checks on punters? Should bookmakers be in fact saying to punters, no, you can't spend any more than this? The Gambling Commission had raised the possibility of £100 being the threshold at which point, if you spend £100 a month with a bookmaker, they have to inquire as to whether you have the money to spend to do that. Now, nothing has actually been done yet by the Gambling Commission. Their assessment of the data that they were presented with is still ongoing. We don't know what they're going to do. Their chief executive recently announced that he was leaving as well. So we don't know what is going to happen with the Gambling Commission, but bookmakers are already acting. I penned a column a few weeks ago talking to one punter who said that he'd had contact from two bookmakers who wanted to see how much he earned. He pointed to £50,000 of earnings and £60,000 in savings. One bookmaker said, you can carry on as before. The other bookmaker said, your deposits will be limited to £625 a month. Subsequent to that, my new Race Press colleague, Chris Cook, has done investigative work speaking to other punters, which shows that many are facing a similar situation. Different bookmakers are giving a different take on what they feel they need to do to satisfy the Gambling Commission pre it actually making its final declaration. The Tote has agreed that it is placing a limit of £750 in deposits before it too makes inquiries of punters. So even before the Gambling Commission has decided what its position is on affordability checks, bookmakers are already putting them into action.
Yeah, exactly. It's going to be a story that
and
runs.
Just quickly, we should also say that bookmakers are also putting affordability checks into action by limiting punters on what they can bet when they're doing rather well. So that is also a form of affordability checks.
And also going back to the interview with Charlie Parker earlier, you heard exactly how well they were doing at the moment, particularly off the back of Cheltenham.
Yeah, there'll be punters in the next few weeks who are limited to what they can bet on the Grand National to a matter of pounds and pence, which is, if they're safe and healthy punters, is absolutely ridiculous.
And talking of the Grand National, there will be owners at Aintree Racecourse, which is a step in the right direction. Owners from tomorrow, Monday the 29th, on racecourses. Just two per horse tomorrow, but more than that later in the week.
Yeah, and so this is a welcome bit of good news to get owners back on British racecourses. Still seems some way off in Ireland, but thankfully we're getting them back on British racecourses as of tomorrow. They've been badly missed, and you have to applaud these people who've been funding the sport while not in effect being able to enjoy the biggest part of the pleasure they take from it. So two owners back from tomorrow. Lingfield and Newcastle have been able to gain a further concession, and they'll have 4 owners per horse on the 2 Good Friday fixtures. Aintree look like they're going to be able to go one step further again, with potentially 6 horses per horse for the Grand National meeting. When you think will be 40 runners in the Grand National,
200 odd people, aren't you, give or take?
Absolutely, for one race, and that'll be a great thing. What's interesting as well is that what emerged last week was that Aintree had seemingly been keen for the Grand National to be part of the government's trial of bringing spectators back in bigger numbers to sporting events. We've already had a couple of trials of that happening within horse racing. They went very well indeed. That may be one reason why the government hasn't selected racing as events for the trials coming up over the coming weeks. But Sefton Council, within which Aintree falls, has actually gone on the record this week saying it was against that happening for the Grand National. And they felt in their particular community it would be the wrong thing to bring thousands of people to Aintree Racecourse and to Liverpool in 2 weeks' time. Even
if it was a fraction. But the interesting point there, the wider point, I think, is the control that local authorities have over pilot events and events of public significance moving into the summer, because it is going to be it's going to be variable.
And it's not the first time we've seen this, Nick. If we go back to the St Leger Festival, absolutely. What was meant to be a 4-day trial there only lasted 1 day, and at one point on the first day, the racecourse were being informed by the council they wanted to evacuate the racecourse. So clearly local authorities will have a big say in these matters going forward.
Now, there was tragedy in Dubai yesterday. There were some wonderful moments, but there was one awful moment, and that was when a horse called Zendon, who was trained by Carlos David in Florida and ridden by Antonio Fresu, pretty well broke the track record in the Dubai Golden Shaheen by over a second. Now, this was a horse who was scrambling around in allowance races at Tampa Bay Downs and appeared to make an enormous step forward, and then suffered a fatal injury immediately after the line. It was a truly sickening sight. And your thoughts with everyone connected with the horse. Now, Lee, this is a delicate area, and clearly it was an awful sight, but this was being beamed all across the world. And a horse had stretched what appeared to be possible in terms of the parameters of its own ability. I'm not suggesting that there was anything untoward, but I think it behoves Meydan and the whole of the racing world to make sure that that fatality is investigated thoroughly and properly for the reassurance of the entire racing industry that there was no impropriety here. That's
right, yeah. The trainer of the horse was formerly assistant to Jason Service, who of course has been implicated in major doping issues in recent times. There is a fine line to tread, because of his one past association, you can't use that as a way of
he's been
conferring
assistant to Bill Mott and other very reputable trainers.
But what is clear is that this poor horse produced a performance that was so off the scale relative to what he had previously achieved, knocking over a second off the track record. His form before that was nowhere near as good as this. He was huge odds for good reason. And as you say, Nick, it would be very regrettable indeed if investigations and questions weren't asked for the reputation of the sport and for the memory of the horse.
And those were this week's talking points. Subscribe to Racing TV to be notified when more Luck on Sunday videos are appearing online. And don't forget to join me for the show every Sunday morning from 9 o'clock with the best guests.